You will probably need to unmute yourself, but I can see your desktop and your webcam. Are you able to hear me? All right, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties. If you'll give us just a few moments.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Sounds perfect.
Okay, I'm working on the video portion now, so bear with me.
Technical problems always crop up. It's fine.
I think it's because we have so many interested folks, which is fantastic. It's a good problem to have.
I completely agree with you.
Okay. So I'm going to keep waiting to see if this will pop up for video. In the meantime, I can introduce myself really quickly. So my name is moor1204. Other folks call me Mel. I'm an application security engineer at a software startup in North Carolina. So really excited to talk a little bit about threat modeling, which is a way to preemptively look through your software applications and design to determine whether or not there are potential security vulnerabilities before they ever get to production. So it's a really great exercise. It doesn't look like I can actually show my screen for some reason. It's just showing me a spinning wheel. So that's a little bit unfortunate. But I can try to talk through
We do see your screen right now. We see your slide.
You can see it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great, fabulous. All right, well, I'm going to present then. I just can't see that you can see it. So let me go ahead and present and we'll get started. Can everyone see my slides?
Yep, they're showing up just fine.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about two things today, threat modeling and self-drafted t-shirts. So you can see my tagline here is model your threats and then model your new t-shirt. So we're really excited. Okay. Let me go ahead and move through. So let's talk a little bit about what threat modeling actually is. And bear with me, I just found a typo, so just gloss over that, but we'll talk about how threat modeling, it sort of works to identify, communicate, and understand potential security vulnerabilities in your software. And this is a source from OWASP that gives this specific definition or more of an academic definition of what threat modeling is. But generally speaking, it's just documenting or diagramming and hopefully mitigating potential security vulnerabilities at the design phase of your software development lifecycle. And realistically, you may use threat modeling as well to go through your legacy software, but the hope is that you'll catch these types of things before they ever get to production. So why might you want to threat model? Well, you can identify design flaws in your software before they go to production, in theory. You can help identify flaws in your legacy software, as we talked about before. You can potentially train your teams to think about security vulnerabilities as a part of their design process. So this can be operations, it can be your feature teams, it can be your SREs, it can be your software folks on the front and the back end, and it can also be your security team so they can get more skilled at finding potential security vulnerabilities as well. And also it helps to improve the design process as a whole over time. So folks will get accustomed to doing threat modeling as a part of their software design process, and hopefully become better and better at finding potential security vulnerabilities before they become an issue. So here's a little bit of a brief history of threat modeling. Obviously, lots of these things are relatively new in the grand scheme of the history of the world. But in the software world, threat modeling is something that's been utilized since the 1970s, if not using the term threat modeling specifically. So in the 70s, Christopher Alexander used the concept of threat modeling, even though it didn't have that term yet, to find potential threats in common architectural patterns. So there's lots of papers on, there's one specific paper that Christopher Alexander wrote, but also lots of papers as contemporaries of him that are really interesting to read. And in the 1980s, Robert Barnard introduced the concept of attacker profiles. So that was another iteration on the things that Christopher Alexander had done in the past. And then in the 1990s, things really started to take off with the advent of regular use of the open internet. So Edward Amoroso introduced the concept of threat trees, which I'm sure some of you have become accustomed to or familiar with. And then our very famous Bruce Schneier introduced the concept of visualizing attack trees with nodes and leaves. And he has a lot of really great papers and blog about threat modeling, and really interesting if you're interested in getting more information about that. And then Microsoft introduced the Thrive threat model, or the Strides threat model that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And Microsoft is kind of known for, I guess, operationalizing this a little bit more than other folks. So we'll talk a little bit about that threat model process in the next couple of slides. So there's more than one type of threat modeling framework. I've listed 4 here. I am most familiar with Stride, so that's the one we're going to talk about. But VAST seems like one that might be really interesting to explore in the next couple of years, in particular because we're looking at threat modeling not just for our software and our infrastructure, but also across the entire SDLC. Are there places where we're maybe in our CI/CD pipeline that we haven't considered could potentially be problematic? And so I'm actually keeping an eye out on the VAST threat model for the future, but currently we're using Stride, so we're going to talk about that. So what is Stride? It's an acronym that stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, or escalation of privileges. So we're looking at 5 or 6 different areas that we want to focus on threat modeling in particular. And so I'll talk a little bit about what spoofing is. It's basically pretending to be someone you're not. Tampering is tampering with data. It can be tampering with network packets. It can be tampering with login pages, for example. And repudiation is not being able to prove someone has or has not done something. And that really centers around logging and monitoring. There's information disclosure, which is basically providing a authorized user with information that they shouldn't have or shouldn't have access to. Denial of service is pretty straightforward. It's you know, obviously not being able to access a resource that you should be able to because either you're overloading the network or overloading your resources. And then escalation of privileges is pretty scary type of thing where you shouldn't have access to something and you're able to give yourself accelerated access to a resource or a series of resources that you shouldn't have access to. So here's a very, very simple network or diagram that we're going to use to go through an actual Stride threat model. This is obviously a well overly simplified service that we've outlined, and this comes from the threat modeling book that Adam Shostak wrote in 2014. It's an excellent resource if you're interested. If you're interested in actually getting really, really deep into the Stride threat model in particular, lots of interesting resources with regards to brainstorming, ways that you can threat model. There's all different types of really great templates as well. So this is this comes from that book. Very, very simple. I've probably never seen a production service that's quite this simplistic, but for the so we can utilize the time that we have, we'll just pretend that this is a thing that folks could actually have in production. So when you think about threat modeling, you think about what could potentially go wrong. Here's a list of questions that we've come across when we look at that in engineering diagram or that data flow diagram to determine what we need to think about when we redesign our software. So spoofing is thinking about, is it possible for someone to pretend to be someone they're not to gain access to our web server or our data center? Is it possible from a tampering perspective for someone to be able to edit the data in our database when they shouldn't be able to? Repudiation is, can an unauthorized user maybe brute force a login page and we aren't doing anything with regards to logging to make sure that we know that that's happening? Can a user request information from a search query that they shouldn't be able to do, or maybe they get more results than they should have access to? Or do we have, with regards to denial service, do we have limitations or throttling on API resources, which isn't shown in this particular diagram, but something to think about. Do we limit the number of times a user can request a login page incorrectly? Those types of things. And then elevation of privileges is, can our customer access our database directly from the open internet? That's a pretty bad thing to do. Do we prevent them from doing something like that? So these are the types of questions that you go through when you talk about threat modeling. And it's really a kind of an alternative to a really positive attitude that most developers have, which is that, okay, we got this thing to do the one thing that we want it to do. This is a way to say, well, how are all the places that we want this thing to do the thing that we want to do, like a login page? Are there ways to break it? Are there things that we aren't thinking about that we need to include into our design process that we wouldn't necessarily think about, because really we're most concerned about making sure it works. So threat modeling is a great resource to kind of turn that on its head and think about how we could design our software better. So here is a workflow to go through the Stride threat model in particular. Typically, you'd want to start with an engineering diagram or data flow diagram like we saw before. Almost all of our production software is going to be way more complex than that, but you can start with components of that instead. So you break it down into pieces so you can think about maybe you only are focused on the API endpoints for a particular service or microservice that you've put in place. So you don't have to do the entire SDLC in one go. That actually I would not advise on that. So you know, start small with a data flow diagram of something that you want to threat model. And then along that trust boundary, which are you know, we saw that trust boundary was the dotted line on the little services. So the data center had its own trust boundary, and then the database, it's not open to the internet, had its own dotted diagram. So you think about along that trust boundary, are there places that we need to be concerned about? And we can go through the Stride model and say, are there places where this could potentially be spoofed? Are there places where we're introducing the opportunity to be vulnerable to denial of service, for example? And then write out specifically how the vulnerability could occur and call out those susceptible systems that you've outlined. And then for those outlined vulnerabilities, you're going to write security tickets, JIRA tickets, whatever it is that you use to track this type of work, and include it in the design for the feature. And my recommendation is to ensure that your feature teams are actually incorporating that as acceptance criteria for actually shipping that feature. And ensure that those tickets are being addressed by your development teams. Often that they may decide this is not part of the you know, the GA of that particular feature, and it's important to reiterate how we want to ensure that these things, these security vulnerabilities, are addressed before we actually submit this and put it into production for users to utilize. And then another thing that's really important to think about is incorporating regression testing into the now fixed vulnerabilities. And the reason that you want to do that is to make sure in new features that you're not actually going backwards and reintroducing these security vulnerabilities in a future release. And finally, hopefully you'll sleep a little bit better knowing that these specific vulnerabilities didn't make it into production. So here are three free tools that you can use. There are obviously paid tools that you can utilize as well. So there's the Microsoft threat modeling tool that's based on this Stride threat model that we talked about today. It is Windows only, so that's a little bit of a disadvantage for those Linux and Mac users. But there's also a new tool that OWASP just released as a 1.0 called Threat Dragon. It is a tool that you can download Mac or Linux. I assume it probably works in Windows, but I haven't tried it. But it's a really interesting kind of a flow diagram that you can utilize, and you can actually pull that down as a JSON object and include it in your release, so you can reuse it and add new things to it in the future as your software features change. And then you can also just kind of go really low key and do a Lucidchart plus web form template and incorporate that as reports. And we've done that in the past where I work. So it seems to be working pretty well. Obviously, automation would be fantastic, but this is a great start. So that's sort of where we're at with regards to threat modeling. I'm going to go ahead and start talking a little bit about self-drafted t-shirts. If everybody's ready to go to the next slide. Okay, so self-drafted t-shirts are actually pretty easy to create. If you just have a little bit of patience and kind of work through some of the challenges of learning how to sew. If you don't already know how to sew, this is a great place to start because it's pretty straightforward. You're really only sewing a few lines, so nothing too complicated, and you're starting with a template that you know already works. So one of the things that I always find really challenging is finding really great fitting t-shirts. And for those of us that are kind of female presenting in the InfoSec world, we know that a lot of times we go to conferences and the t-shirts are just not quite the right fit. So I decided to learn how to create my own t-shirts or really modify the t-shirts that I do get from some of these conference talks so that they will actually fit me in a way that I prefer. So I showed you an example of my favorite t-shirt. This is not my actual favorite t-shirt, but my favorite t-shirt is a Rolling Stones t-shirt. So just suspend your disbelief on that. And it's honestly really hard to find the right t-shirt fit, even if you're not talking about InfoSec conference t-shirts. So I always try to modify and tailor my clothes when I can. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So there's a couple of ways that you can draft your new favorite t-shirt. You can start with your favorite t-shirt. So I've shown you one here. It's just the inside out of a t-shirt that I have. I don't know if you can see myself here, but if you can. So this is inside out, and I'll show you kind of when we talk about how to assemble this, how you can sew these seams together. So what you'll do is we're going to either remove the seams here, basically disassembling my favorite t-shirt, or you can trace around the t-shirt with some tissue paper, and it's a lot harder to do because you can see, I don't know if you can see my screen here, but you have this kind of crew neck here, and that's a little bit hard if you haven't done it before to replicate. But we'll talk about how we might go about doing that in just a few minutes. So I'm going to show you how you could do both of these things. They're pretty straightforward, but we'll go through it now. So here's a list of the things that you're going to need to make this happen. You're going to need your favorite t-shirt, which I have here. I would purchase a jersey knit fabric from either the fabric store, for those of us who are not shelter in place just yet, or an online store. So you can probably find it from Amazon or Joann's or any number of really great online fabric stores. Or you can do what I mentioned before with my InfoSec t-shirts and do a t-shirt that's too big, and then you would just trace along that and actually pull in the seams. You're going to need a pair of sharp scissors so that you can cut your thread and or the seams on your t-shirt. You're going to need some tissue paper for tracing, some straight pins or safety pins, some needle and thread that matches the color of your t-shirts. In this case, I have a gray t-shirt, so I need to get some gray thread that matches as closely as possible. Or
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
could we possibly try to get the webcam working?
Oh, is it not showing? It's still
No,
spinning. I can't seem to
all right.
click on it. I'm so sorry.
I'm gonna click it one more time because we were thinking that we probably should have been seeing something the way you were talking.
Yeah, and it basically is just a spinning wheel. I can't seem to show my webcam. I'm not sure why.
Okay. We gave it a shot.
Yeah, sorry about that. But I will talk as if you can't see me instead. Okay, so you can't see my gray t-shirt, but I have a gray t-shirt in front of me, in front of my face that you can't see. So apologies for that, but thank you for bringing it up that you can't see. So what you're going to want to do, you have the option also, I did talk about needing needle and thread and a permanent marker so that you can trace around the perimeter of the pieces or the whole t-shirt. We also optionally can do a seam ripper, which is a little bit easier than using a pair of scissors to cut the seams. Or you can also use a sewing machine or serger if you have something of that, and that will make it a little bit easier as well. But we're going to assume that you probably are not going to go out and buy a sewing machine or serger if you don't already have it. You can do this by hand as well, just takes a bit longer. All right, so if you choose option 2, which is to use the pieces of your t-shirt, you're going to, if you have a t-shirt in front of you, this might be easier to visualize, but if you turn your t-shirt inside out, there are a number of seams that you'll see, and it's just held together by thread. So you'll just rip out those seams very carefully with a pair of scissors or a seam ripper. And if you have a commercial t-shirt, it will have serger seams. So it looks like it's looping over the fringe of the seam itself. So you'll want to very carefully take the edge of your scissors and slide it underneath the thread and just cut it through. And just be super careful because you can cut the fabric itself and then you'll end up with a hole in your new favorite t-shirt. Or your old favorite t-shirt, which you may not want to do if you ever want to reassemble it and still wear your old favorite t-shirt. Okay, so you'll remove those seams, remove the seams, and then start with the sleeves, the side seams, and then the sleeves, and then put the 2 sleeves aside when you're done. And then you're going to cut the shoulder seams, which is going to be from the collar to where the sleeves were located. And then when you're done, you should have 4 pieces. So you have the 2 sleeves, the 1 front piece with the scoop in the front, and then the back piece, which should have a tag attached. Okay, so the next step is to trace this shirt. So you'll want to find some tissue paper or newspaper if you want, if you don't have tissue paper. And you're basically just going to line out the pieces of the t-shirt onto the tissue paper, and you're going to find your permanent marker and lay out your t-shirt onto the paper and then essentially trace it. You can use straight pins or safety pins to pin it to the tissue to make it a little easier, but that's essentially what you're going to do. And then you're going to cut out the fabric plus the tissue paper pieces. And then you're going to take the tissue paper pieces and separate it from the old t-shirt pieces and put it on top of the new fabric that you bought. And then you're just going to pin those tissue paper pieces to the fabric. And you're going to do the same thing where you outline the perimeter of that and then cut it out. And then the next step is to assemble the t-shirt. And I'm just making sure I'm good on time. So you're going to take the shoulder seams first and line them up inside out, basically. So the part of the fabric that you want to be on the outside when you actually wear it, you're going to put those 2 sides together and pin the shoulder seams together and then sew right across from one end to the other. And you're going to do the same thing for the other side of the shoulder seam. So there should be two shoulder seams, and you're going to sew them both separately inside out. And then the next thing you're going to do is pin the sleeves to the armholes. And so you'll want to make sure that the shortest part of the shoulder or the sleeve itself is going to go to the bottom. That's going to be the bottom part of the sleeve. And then you're going to sew that around the perimeter of the sleeve hole that from the shoulder seam down to where the side seams will be sewn. You're going to do that for both sleeves. And then after you're done with that, you'll pin the side seams together, and you'll start from the bottom so that if you do make a mistake and don't line the sleeves together just right, then you'll be able to accommodate for that and kind of pinch it into the hole here where the armpit should be. And so that's pretty much all you're going to need to do to get a really basic outline of a new favorite t-shirt that you know will fit just right. There's optional finishing that you can do. I would definitely consider, especially depending on the type of knit that you get, creating a hem at the bottom of the t-shirt so that you'll just fold it over and then sew along the bottom there. You can also hem the sleeves, and there's a lot of different tutorials on how to do that. You can also do really fancy hems if you wanted. And this might be a good place to do contrast stitching, which is basically choosing a color that's completely opposite of the t-shirt itself, just to give it a little pizzazz. And you can also order a knit collar. I would not recommend making one yourself unless you're an advanced sewist. It's actually pretty difficult to do in my opinion, but maybe other folks are a little more talented than myself. And you'll just use that to get that kind of ribbed collar at the top. And then you can use bias tape, which those of you who know what bias tape is, it's a really fantastic thing to do. And the other thing I didn't mention that you can do is include a little pocket if you wanted. So I have the t-shirt that I have right here, which you can't see, unfortunately, has a floral pocket that I put on the front here. So that's really a nice little contrast to the gray t-shirt. So that's pretty much all I have. Does anybody have any questions? Not sure if I can see them or not. Let me see.
I did see one question that rose to the top that was not about the webcam, and it's, do you think that it'd be smart to develop a tool similar to Stride or ThreadDragon?
I don't see why not. Absolutely, especially if it's you know, non-Microsoft friendly. Absolutely, I think that'd be really great.
Which industry tool do you think works the best?
So as far as, that's a good question. And we actually only use open source, so I don't know that I can answer that intelligently, but I know that there are lots and lots of tools out there that range in price that other folks could probably pipe in and provide some guidance on.
All right, and somebody was asking if you use Fortify.
We don't, but I know that other folks in the industry have used it.
Okay, switching topics, I guess. When making your own tee, are you removing the collar from the equation?
Yes, so that's a step that I didn't include here, but some t-shirts do have that collar, and you would definitely want to remove the collar. And then if you're able to get, for your new t-shirt, a collar that you can order online, you can usually get them from kind of nice, they're considered notions. So if you go to like an online fabric store and try to order one, you should be able to find them, or Amazon also. But you'll want to, if you do want to have that collar, you'll definitely want to include that in your new t-shirt. But yes, that is something that you'll want to remove unless you want to not include a collar. And that way you'll just have that extra inch and a half or so of give at the top for your new t-shirt.
All right, let's see if we have any more. And it doesn't look like we do. So thank you so very much for this talk. That's fascinating. I didn't even think that you would need to take a t-shirt apart to be able to do that, but it makes sense because I feel you on that t-shirt fit thing from conferences.
Oh yeah. Awesome.